nonprofit radio coverage of 19NTC. You know what that is. It's the 2019 Nonprofit Technology Conference. We're in Portland, Oregon at the Convention Center, and this interview, like all our 19NTC interviews, is brought to you by our partners at Act Blue, free fundraising tools to help nonprofits make an impact. My guests now are Laura Cole and Paul Habig. Laura is Director of Account Services at Sanky Communications. Paul is President of Sanky Communications. Welcome. Welcome, Laura. Welcome, Paul.
Well, thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for having us.
My pleasure. Your seminar topic is Finders Keepers, the Art of Donor Retention. I don't know how many guests have been on nonprofit radio telling us that the cost of retaining a donor is so much less than the cost of acquiring a new donor. Laura, let's start with you. What are nonprofits just not getting? I mean, and this is not just within the past 6 months. This is for years. We've been talking about donor retention problems. The retention rate is so low. I don't know what the most current is, but it's sad, whatever it is. What are we not getting right? And you're welcome to give the most recent stat if I'm sure you know it.
So I think it's a great point, and I think one of the reasons why we wanted to talk about it today, and in our session we really focused on it too, is that this December was definitely a challenge for a lot of nonprofits, and it was particularly a challenge for getting new donors in the door. And that means that retention becomes that much more important. And to your point, retention doesn't happen automatically. You really have to work and focus on your communications to make sure that you're building that relationship, because donors are going to give, but you have to take that as the first step of the relationship and really work on cultivating them so that they're going to become lifelong donors.
Paul, why have we been talking about this for so long? Why are nonprofits not getting the message that Laura just reiterated for the millionth time?
You know, I ended the session off with the audience and said to them, don't.
Oh, you've already done your session? You're on the downside already. Okay.
We are.
Good.
So I ended it off by saying, don't be impatient. Donor retention takes time. It takes time to improve it. So we did a case study with the African Wildlife Foundation, and we've been working with them for like 7 years. And we were able to get their donor retention right now, currently in 2018, from 2018, up to almost 70%. Prior year donors to give again in the second year. And it took years of planning and communicating, and it really is the foundation of what we discussed and what we believe in, is that you really need to build the foundation with technology, good technology from the start. And so this organization, we went through a really important and arduous database and technology conversion for them almost 3 years ago?
No, I think it was closer to 5.
5 years ago. And so we were able to actually put all the pieces that you need to make this a more automated process to really focus on things, which allowed the organization and us and freed us up to be more creative with how we spoke to donors, the campaigns that we produced for the organization, and really give them an engaging donor experience throughout the 12-month period that we benchmarked this morning.
All right, so it's a long-term process. You need to have infrastructure in place before you can hope to move the needle on retention. Have I encapsulated this?
Yeah, no, the idea is that one of the things we mentioned at the end was you have to invest. Unfortunately, invest in the technology, even before we even get into donor retention versus new donor retention. It is important because what happens is if you don't have that infrastructure there, a misstep, and it's interesting, it was we originally were going to call the session How to Lose a Donor in 10 Days, a kind of pop culture reference for a movie, but it really is true, is that idea that in the first part of the relationship, if you have a misstep, you probably lose a donor for life. If you code them differently, if you personalize something and it's the wrong information, if you don't thank them in a timely manner, and there's a lot of different things that go into that. So really kind of making sure that infrastructure is up and running to make sure that you don't have those early missteps, so that you can create a lifelong donor.
Okay, that starts to get to some of the pitfalls you have in your description. Talk about pitfalls that are causing donor attrition. So why don't you naming the person incorrectly.
Yeah, personalization is one of our most powerful tools in marketing and fundraising, but if you call Bob, Barbara, you kind of lose a donor for life, for sure.
All right.
Making sure that you already have in motion The idea that if someone comes on brand new, this is like a data problem that people do, that you're suppressing the people who are new versus old and actually figuring out who they are. So for instance, I make a donation. A lot of times what some systems is that you'll go right into the next campaign stream, but I just made my first donation. So what we generally do with the technology for our clients is that we'll create an automated program that will actually capture that new donor or someone possibly who hasn't given but maybe give their email address for the first time and put them on a separate track and making sure that at the same time they're suppressed from any other campaigns. Generally, the campaigns would have some kind of fundraising ask. So really kind of setting the stage of their relationship from the beginning and not forgetting that they just made a new donation and really trying to, the information that we provide in that series is meant to be engaging in the part where it actually educates them on the mission and deeper into the program versus, usually probably what we brought that original donor in is on some kind of urgency, a really quick and gut emotional reaction. But at that point, then you have their attention and you have to use it wisely.
Okay, and Laura, suppress them for how long?
So generally what we'll work with organizations to do is to build a really robust welcome series. And that usually is at least 4 to 5 emails that will go out over, say, 2 to 3 weeks. So making sure that they complete that cycle before they start to get the regular stream of communications. So they're not kind of being dropped in the middle of one campaign, or they're not getting the welcome series and that campaign, but instead they're really sort of sitting by themselves getting this very targeted, very tailored series that's going to introduce them to your mission, to the organization, tell them what their donation has done before you ask again. So it's really making sure that those, and to go back to sort of the movie reference that we made, it is like a relationship, and if you make a mistake in the first date or the second date or the third date, you're probably not going to turn into a long-term relationship.
But to add to that question about how long, it does vary from organization to organization, and what we discussed this morning would be the organization that we were case studying, which is the African Wildlife Foundation. They have a membership program, so the how long is a shorter period of time, because with a membership program and a lower dollar average gift for them, repetition in marketing and fundraising is key to their success. But some organizations we work with that might start off at a much higher average gift, that's where you would have to really kind of be more conscientious on the frequency and when that next asks come in. So that could be, with an organization with membership, you might be a 2 to 3 week where you're suppressing, but an organization that has a higher average gift donor, you might actually suppress a month or 2 before, or really looking at their giving history. So it's not a one size fits all. It really has to be customized to each organization and what their mission and what type of donor they do have.
Okay.
And also targeted to the constituent. If you're talking about a donor that's giving a small gift, you're going to want to suppress them for a shorter period of time than someone that gave you $10,000. That person's going to need a lot longer period of pure cultivation before you make that ask again.
Okay, let's do some more pitfalls. I like these pitfalls to avoid attrition.
Absolutely.
Laura, go ahead.
I think one of the big ones, and this is partly why digital retention tends to be lower than direct mail, is not making sure that you're updating donor email addresses. Whether they tell you that they have a new email address, but even more proactively finding out what maybe someone's new email address is, called an ECOA, or email change of address process. Something like that, where you're actively saying, let me make sure that I can keep emailing a donor, because email addresses change much more frequently than someone's mailing address. People don't generally move as much as they change their email address. Maybe they go to a new job, maybe they switch from Yahoo to Hotmail. So making sure that you can keep talking to them, because if you're not going to talk to them, you can't make that ask, you can't cultivate, and they're not going to give. They're much less likely to give again if you kind of lose touch with them.
I'm not even sure that nonprofits know. A lot of them know that there are services that will do an ECOA, email change of address, for you.
Yeah.
The way the Postal Service will do.
Like an NCOA,
exactly.
National Change of Address. Yeah.
I have now on the NCOA. I have a little personal story. My dad's name and my name are the same, Anthony Martignetti, but he uses a J. He's Anthony Joseph. I have the same middle name, but I never use the J. So there's one indicator that we're different. Also, his current address is not my last address. I haven't lived there since I was 18 years old.
Sure.
I went to college. Okay, I moved from New York City to North Carolina. More than a dozen charities started emailing Anthony J. Martignetti to my North Carolina address. Charities that my dad is an active donor for. Now, he's a small level donor. He's one of these guys who writes like $15, $20, $25 checks, and I mean, literally, he does dozens of these a month. He gives a lot at the end of the year. They were aspiring to be proactive, but there were two flags that should have been raised that I'm not the guy that he's not the guy who moved. The middle initial and the last address.
So that brings us to another pitfall. It's one of the major pitfalls a lot of nonprofits fall into is data issues. Bad data can really harm donor retention. So in your case, these organizations are not actually when they're looking up your information, it's household or individual, and so we've seen this happen for organizations where you'll get a household match, and that's what happened with
last
you.
Name.
Yes, but versus an individual which is directly just you and that address. But it brings back to the point, which I think to go back to your topic on pitfalls.
Okay. Yeah.
Data, it can be the point that, and for all nonprofits, and it's the hardest part for an organization to really both invest the time and money and resources, and that's usually people power,
Absolutely.
to make sure that you have clean data for knowing when someone is active or made a gift recently, and then you ask them to renew when they just renewed a month ago, or I mentioned the personalization piece, or recognizing when someone is a high dollar donor or even a sustainer, and that's one of actually the things that you mentioned is really important. Sustaining giving is one of the differentiating factors where online retention does actually start going up from offline retention if you're really good at recruiting sustainers or monthly givers and then making an active effort. So part of the case study we did this morning was that we've been actively growing the sustainer file for this organization, and right now they're at about 25+% that their digital giving is coming from sustainer giving, which each year help their retention grow. And that's why they're close to 70% now on retention because of that. But when we treat sustainers, we always recognize that they're a sustainer. So even though you don't want to stop communicating to sustainers, you don't want them to forget about the organization, but we segment and we recognize their contribution, and we usually put them in a lot of the engagement campaigns and cultivation. The awesome part about sustainers is they're so engaged with the organization, what I always call the 13th gift. So there'll be a monthly donor make 12. They'll make that 13th gift because they're so engaged, but you have to really treat them well. And so generally they'll get a matching gift campaign, maybe year end, to say, hey, we have this match going on. We know you're a monthly supporter, but we just wanted to bring it to your attention. It's all about the nuanced messaging and really thinking about that. But it goes back to the data being clean and knowing who you're speaking to, segmenting your audiences, and really paying attention to that. And bad data really can really lead to
mistakes like that. Now, if it wasn't my dad, I wouldn't have given them the second chance.
Sure.
I would have just tossed it or said, take me off your list.
Hence, how to lose a donor in 10 days.
Exactly. Any more pitfalls? I like the ticking off these things that orgs may be doing wrong.
Yeah.
So along the lines of what you brought up, I think one of the biggest pitfalls is not respecting when donors say, hey, I don't want to get mail, or you have the wrong address, please update it. Donors who bother to reach out and tell you that are very loyal donors. If they're proactively reaching out and saying, please send, to this new email or this new postal address, or this is the wrong, middle initial, or this is the wrong, last name. Anyone who reaches out with that cares a lot about the organization. And so it's making sure that you're respecting that and that there's business rules and, to Paul's point, people in place to make those updates.
Right, because the second time when the person has to write second request,
then you're done.
You're done. You're hurting.
So
absolutely.
And that dovetails into a point of really making sure the right hand's talking to the left hand, where if you're running a campaign that you have really good donor service reps who understand what's going on with the fundraising department and can actually field those questions. So if they got a matching gift request, for instance, knowing that when they answer the phone that they're talking about that. A lot of time our donors will call for organizations and say, will my gift still be matched? I'm a little late. So having someone ready to know that. But at the same time, what we find the organizations have been most successful is when they have somebody on the phone who can really take a donor complaint and make them to a lifelong donor. And it's just really preparing them and training them and treating someone like a human being and understanding that even their $25 gift is just as important as the $1,000 gift when they take the energy to call the organization. And generally, you can really kind of swing a donor to be a really lifelong supporter, as long as you have somebody on the lines and the phones. Many organizations forget about that. And you made a good point this morning, which I'll let you make about even just the last week of the year.
Well, it's remembering that some of the biggest giving days on the online side are not working days. It's the end of the year, it's Christmas, it's New Year's, it's days when the office may be closed. But if no one's answering the phones when you have donors trying to make a gift, if you get back to them in January, it's too late. You sort of miss that window. And so it's thinking about customer service, especially on those key days when, even if, recognizing it's a holiday, but it's when people are giving and needing to be there for the donors.
Do either of you know there's a paradox, service repair paradox or something like that in customer service, where if you've made a mistake and corrected it as a company, you will have a more loyal customer than if you hadn't made the mistake in the first place. And that goes to what you were describing, Paul. And Laura too. That there's someone there responsive that actually makes the change or corrects the problem. They have to be empowered to correct the problem. And if they do, you'll have a more loyal. Well, it feeds over in our circle.
It does. Yeah.
You have a more loyal donor than if you had never made the mistake to begin with.
So we made a point this morning. Another don't was when you're
service recovery. That's what it is.
Yes.
Service recovery paradox.
So we made a point talking about the fact that, okay, so you're gonna make mistakes sometimes. So just say, make sure your email's rendering correctly when someone views it. Make sure when someone lands on a donation form, it's working correctly. However, technology breaks down sometimes, regardless of how much you test, how great you are at that. But what I talk to the audience about is, as long as you're both timely with your apology, and also just things do happen. And one of the best examples would have been Steve Jobs, when the iPhone had the antenna issue, he pretty much changed the entire paradigm for PR in the sense of how he handled that situation, where they were roasting Apple at that point, and he actually turned it around, and it became the best-selling iPhone because the way he handled it, they took responsibility and then they moved on. And I think the quote was, "Well, technology breaks down." Actually, all phones drop calls, and it's not just the iPhone, and then quickly the media shifted in there. But the whole idea is being quick and nimble and being able to go back out. So if a nonprofit has an issue with their donation form or something with their site, being quick and being able to be, sometimes humor works in some ways in some organizations depending on your mission, but being direct on that and really kind of talking about it and getting in front of it is so important. And again, then that experience level, we actually see that a lot of the times those correction emails do perform quite well, sometimes even better than other emails in a series when you go back and you're just really human and honest about what happened
and take responsibility.
Exactly.
That's a piece of what you're describing. All right.
And to your point earlier about the small dollar donor, it's important to remember that for that donor, that's a big commitment they've made. For you, it's a small amount of money, but for them, it's a big commitment. And so treating them well, regardless of the amount of money that they give. And that's one thing that the digital space allows for, is that high-touch treatment. It allows for the personalization. It allows for the customization. It allows those donors to feel special, regardless of how much they've given. And in terms of numbers, sometimes those small dollar donors that give in year after year and say, "Hey, I've moved, please update it," those may be your best planned giving prospects.
Oh, absolutely.
You can't dismiss them even if they're giving you a little amount, because for them it's a lot.
I do planned giving consulting. I've been doing it since 1997.
There you go.
And
the ultimate retention.
I've seen lots of algorithms, I guess, for who makes a good plan giving prospect. I still think the best plan giving prospect is that person who's given you 23 gifts in the past 25 years.
Exactly.
Yes.
And the most recent one was no more than like 6 months ago or something.
Yeah.
And they are thinking about you every single year. And I really don't care if it's $10 a year.
Yeah.
So in some cases, I think they're testing you, but they're probably not testing you for 23 years. But some of those initial small dollar gifts, they may be testing you. Do I get a thank you? Is it timely?
Yes.
Do they screw things up in the thank you? Et cetera. So I think there's some of that, some of the testing on the small dollar.
Yeah.
Laura, to your point about small dollar donations, but they are enormously good plan giving prospects. That kind of loyalty and longevity, even at small double digit levels, Very good plan giving prospects.
To your earlier point about, because acquisition is so challenging, one planned gift from someone who made a gift for 20 years who can pay for an acquisition program for an entire organization,
right.
Meaning, you invest that money 20 years ago and then you're banking on it later on where they've left this entire, there's part of their estate to an organization. And so it's important to actually track those folks, right? To find out what the origin of those folks who do come in, because it's generally, as you just said, those low dollar donors really do care about the organization. That's why they stuck around for 23 years.
It is important to look back at the giving history
and
try to ascertain from those patterns who your other good prospects are. Yeah.
And that's one thing we spoke about at the session is the data side of it. Is to really track retention and really leverage it, you have to have the data collection in place. You have to know who your donors are. You need IDs for them so you can track their giving year over year. But you also need to be able to identify where they came from in the first place. If you want to invest smart going forward, you have to know what your investments really yielded in the past.
Yeah, what was the cost of acquisition? What was the source?
The source.
And source and what did it cost?
Exactly. Yeah. And even if it was a long time ago, being able to know what that was is really valuable.
That's a great transition, Laura. Any more we can say about technology? I mean, Paul, well, you both hit it a lot. But is there any more strategies around technology that needs to be in place?
So Paul touched on it, and I think it's important is to recognize that your technology can work for you or against you, and recognizing where it is working for you and maybe where it's presenting challenges, and maybe those are too much, and you're really costing yourself on the retention side for not investing in technology. But it's also recognizing that technology without the people to really leverage it isn't going to get you very far, that you need data people, you need people who know how to use the technology and can really make it work for you. So I think it's technology by itself is not powerful. It's technology and people. And
subsumed in what you're saying is you have to hire the expertise that you need. If it not a full-time employee, you have to get a consultant, freelancer. You can't manage this and master it on your own, and that's not your expertise anyway. It's an inefficient use of your own time or your organization's time to try to master something that you don't know. You need to invest in the talent that you need.
Because the organizations are good at their missions, in many ways, right? Yeah. It's not really about marketing or technology or database management. I mean, it does come to that sometimes, yeah.
And I think also a point you made earlier that I do think sometimes gets lost is that when it comes to retention, sometimes it's fancy technology and automation and behavioral-driven content. And sometimes it's the basics. It's the acknowledgement. Did you send an acknowledgement? Did it talk about the impact that the gift had? Did it, thank the donor in an appropriate way? Was it sent out on time? So with all the bells and whistles that are out there in technology now, it's important to not forget those fundamentals and to make sure that those are in place, regardless of whether you have a staff of 10 or 1.
It's very well said. You two should be co-presidents.
Take note of that, Paul.
What is it? Yeah, Director of Account Services. Sounds beneath her to me.
We've been working together for 10 years.
It's true.
That's good.
Yeah.
Co-president. No. Okay. Okay. Let's look at metrics. You're talking about metrics to measure churn and retention. Mm-hmm. Who wants to kick off the metrics? We got like 4 more minutes left together. So
you want to start?
Sure. So the biggest thing when it comes to metrics is having the data in place and knowing whether or not you even have the data to track it. And the key for retention is that you're tracking donor cohorts. So it's not talking about the total number of gifts. It's talking about donors and specific groups of donors. So when you want to measure overall retention from one year to another, you need to know which donors gave in year 1 and which donors went on to give in year 2. So if you can't actually identify that because you don't have the IDs or you don't have the data in a place,
technology infrastructure we just talked about,
you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah. And similarly, knowing someone who's new versus who's renewed is quite important, because going back to the point you made earlier about acquisition, the retention of a new donor is right now hovers around 25%. And so, really,
the retention of a first-time donor
is about 20.
So
organizations lose 75% of the people they bring in.
First-time donors.
Yeah, and so there is making sure you have the ability to track these things so that you actually then can figure out your targeted strategies towards these groups, treating them separately in some ways, and actually having creative and ideas and specific pieces that go to them so that you can retain those first people. We kind of haven't touched upon it, but a lot lot of the strategies that we've been implementing with great success is trying to convert a lot of those first-time donors into sustainers. And that really has helped lift the programs on the digital side, and where digital retention for the overall programs have been on the rise a little bit, and particularly with this organization that we case study today, African Wildlife Foundation, the sustainer program has been really one of the key to the success of really good online retention, because we really quickly move folks from their first gift and then have strategies to convert them to sustainers, and then do 2 individual sustainer drives where it could be coupled with the match, and really kind of back to really strong, evocative, creative that goes back to, for their, and this mission is, poaching of elephants and the crisis that's going on there. But it works with other organizations too. And so the success of those programs, and then having the data to make sure that you actually keep the retention of your sustainers is another really important factor, because that there's low-hanging fruit that can be easily forgotten or missed by organizations when credit cards expire, and making sure that you really invest in that channel, and it's actually more channels like we were discussing this morning. Not only, sometimes email does not work to retain a sustainer, you actually need to use offline and send a direct mail piece, or and take it even further, and sometimes we'll do telemarketing to see if we can get that that person back, because their lifetime value is greater than most other sources.
Why do we just have like 30 seconds? How come sustainers stop sustaining?
I think 2 reasons. I think one is some sustainers don't realize that they've became a sustainer. So generally in the first 2 or 3 months,
that was a mistake.
It was a mistake,
okay.
And that goes back to data, making sure that when you confirm those sustainers, that you actually tell them they're a sustainer.
Okay.
There is like a threshold where they pass month 3 and 4, and then you got them. The other thing is credit cards. People switching,
credit card expires,
or they cancel.
Stolen,
exactly.
And then they decide I've done it long enough. Basically,
you kind of want sustainers to almost go on autopilot. And and then really you still want to engage them, but you don't need to constantly remind them that they're making that gift, but you want to still engage them on your mission. So those are 2 areas where I'd say that where you would lose sustainers.
Okay, we got to leave it there. That flew.
Fantastic. This was awesome.
All right, yes, they're both with Sanky Communications. Paul is the president, and Laura is soon to be co-president, but currently director of account services. This interview, like all the 19NTC interviews, brought to you by our partners at Act Blue, free fundraising tools to help nonprofits make an impact. Thanks so much for being with Nonprofit Radio's coverage of 19NTC.